I always thought the worst betrayals were loud. I imagined doors slamming or voices cracking or someone shouting until the walls shook. But the night my family ended our story, everything was quiet. Too quiet. That is how you know a moment is going to change your life. Silence gets heavy, air gets tight, and you suddenly understand that you are standing at the edge of a line you did not know existed. I still remember the moment the envelope slid across the table. My mother's hand moved slowly, gracefully, as if she were offering me a birthday card instead of what it truly was. That envelope did not just change my life. It exposed everything my family spent years pretending was not real. If you have ever been the quiet one in your family, the one they expected to shrink just to make room for everyone else, you might understand why I did not speak at first. I simply stared at it. Maison Aurora was crowded that night, golden lights dripping from crystal chandeliers, violins humming through the air, the kind of place where people celebrate milestones that belong to everyone but you. My mother insisted on hosting my pre-graduation dinner here. She said it was tradition. The truth was simpler. She liked places where people could see her. My father liked places where he could be seen. My brother Chase liked anywhere he could record content. And me, I was just there because I was invited 24 hours before, with a quiet reminder to dress appropriately, as if appearance had ever mattered more than presence. I took my seat across from them. My father gave me a nod that looked more like a business agreement than a greeting. My mother smiled without warmth. Chase lifted his phone slightly, angling it just enough to capture anything dramatic. That should have been my first warning. Some people do not show up to support you. They show up to witness your fall. The server placed a glass of water in front of me, and then my mother reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope. A plain ivory rectangle. Clean, cold, final. She pushed it toward me with 2 fingers. I noticed her wedding ring catching the light, scattering reflections across the tablecloth. For a moment, I wondered if she had rehearsed this motion. It felt practiced, almost perfect. I picked it up slowly. The paper was thicker than I expected, formal, heavy, as if it understood the weight of what it carried. "Open it," my father said without emotion. His tone was the same one he used during conference calls, a voice meant for transactions, not daughters. Chase leaned in unconsciously. I think he was waiting for entertainment more than truth. Everyone at that table seemed to be waiting for something, but none of them were prepared for the person I had quietly become. When I slit the envelope open, the restaurant behind us faded into a soft blur. The violinist paused mid-note. A few conversations dipped for a moment. It was as if the whole room inhaled with me. Inside the envelope was not money, was not a card, was not congratulations. It was a letter signed by my parents and my brother, declaring that, as of that evening, they were releasing themselves from all responsibilities, ties, and obligations to me. Their exact words were written with perfect penmanship, a neat little announcement that I was no longer part of the Morgan family. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I did not give them the reaction they came here to record. Because the truth is, I already knew something they did not know. The family I had been fighting to belong to had never really been mine. They loved the version of me that stayed small. They had no use for the version that grew quietly and worked relentlessly and built something they did not understand. A strange calm settled in my chest. It felt almost like clarity. They thought this letter was the end of my story. They had no idea it was the beginning of theirs. I folded the paper once, then again, precise, controlled. My mother blinked as if confused by my silence. My father frowned. Chase lowered his phone just slightly, as though he realized the moment was not unfolding the way he expected. The sound of the violin drifted back into the air, slow and haunting. This is the part most people never believe. But as I sat there staring at the people who raised me, the people who signed their names on a document meant to erase me, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because when someone shows you the truth of who they are, the hardest part of your life is already over. The guessing, the hoping, the pretending, all of it ends the moment the envelope touches the table. If you stay with me until the end, you will understand why I thanked them for it. You will see how that single sheet of paper gave me the power to rewrite everything. They thought they were cutting me out, but what they were really doing was setting me free, and freeing the quiet one in the family is the mistake they will regret most. When I left that restaurant, with the disownment letter folded neatly inside my coat, I thought the hardest part of the night was behind me. But the truth is, That moment was only the surface. If you want to understand why I did not break when my family cut me off, you have to understand what it was like growing up as the child they never chose. People think a family falls apart suddenly, like a glass shattering on the floor. Mine did not. My family cracked slowly, quietly, over years of tiny fractures no one wanted to admit existed, and I learned early that silence can hurt more than any shouted insult, especially when it comes from the people who claim to love you. I grew up in a house where achievement was the only language spoken fluently. My father, Gregory Morgan, believed a child was only as valuable as the results they produced. My mother, Vanessa, believed a child was only as lovable as the image they helped her project. And my older brother, Chase, fit their blueprint perfectly. Even his childhood photos looked polished, like he stepped into the world camera-ready. Meanwhile, I was the kind of kid who liked to take things apart to see how they worked. Clocks, radios, old laptops. I asked too many questions. I stayed up past midnight coding math puzzles on a hand-me-down computer. None of those things made sense to them. And since they could not display it or brag about it, they pretended not to see it. I remember being 7 the first time I realized Chase was the chosen one. We were at a family barbecue, and my father introduced us to his colleagues. "This is my son Chase," he said proudly. He placed his hand on my brother's shoulder the way people do when they hold something valuable. Then after a pause so long it made my stomach twist, he added, "And this is Riley." His voice softened in that polite way people do when they mention something forgettable. His colleague nodded, smiled, and asked Chase what sports he played. No one asked me anything. I stood there holding a plastic cup of lemonade, wondering if I had done something wrong, or if simply existing quietly was enough to be overlooked. Moments like that did not just happen once. They became a rhythm. At dinner parties, at school events, at holiday gatherings, Chase always stood centered in the frame while I hovered at the edge. Half captured, half wanted, a shadow beside his spotlight. And as I grew older, my parents became subtle experts at reinforcing my place in the family. My mother always said Chase was charismatic while I was reserved. My father said Chase was a leader while I was analytical. They spoke about us as if we came from two different families entirely, and maybe in their minds, we did. When I entered high school, I thought things might shift. I made honor roll every semester, won coding competitions, earned early college credits. Teachers praised me for my work ethic and curiosity. I tried telling my parents about the science fair where I built a small logistics simulation that caught the attention of a professor. My father nodded once and said, "That is nice, but leadership requires more than numbers." Then he asked Chase how football practice was going. My mother scrolled through photos from Chase's homecoming dance, showing them to relatives as if they were national achievements. Every time I tried to share something, she would say later, "Riley, we are busy." Later never came. Looking back now, I can see how these small dismissals built the foundation that eventually allowed them to hand me a disownment letter without hesitation. When a family spends years minimizing one child, removing them entirely feels less like cruelty and more like routine. But here is the part they never understood. Being overlooked does not break a person. It shapes them. It teaches them to watch, to listen, to analyze, to build strength in the dark. And the child who grows strong in silence becomes the adult who does not collapse when the noise comes. In my junior year, I earned a national scholarship in data science, the kind of scholarship that opens doors for students without last names like mine. I emailed the news to my parents. 6 hours later my mother replied, "Love this, sweetheart. Busy prepping for the charity gala tonight. Can we post about it tomorrow?" They never posted it. They never asked about it again. That was the day I stopped trying to make them proud and started trying to make myself undeniable. You might think moments like these would make me bitter. They did not. They made me focused. Because when love is conditional, you learn to build a life where your value cannot be negotiated. And that is exactly what I did. People think the disownment letter was the beginning of my family turning on me. It was not. It was the conclusion to a story they had been writing for years. Every ignored achievement, every redirected conversation, every time they introduced me last. The disownment letter was not a surprise. It was the final punctuation. But here is the hook most people miss. When my family folded me out of their world, they did not realize I had already built one that did not include them. And the quiet child they tried so hard not to see was about to become the one person they could not escape. If you stay with me, you will see how a lifetime of being overlooked became the sharpest weapon I ever carried. Sometimes, the unchosen child is the one who learns how to choose herself, and that choice is where everything changes. When people hear what my family eventually did to me, the disownment letter, the signatures lined up like a row of knives, they assume the betrayal must have come out of nowhere, but nothing about that moment was sudden. By the time my parents placed that envelope in front of me, the erasing had been happening for years. Quiet, skillful, almost elegant, the way only a family can erase the child they never intended to keep. You would think being overlooked feels like emptiness, but it doesn't. It feels like being rewritten one tiny line at a time, not forgotten, just corrected, adjusted, downplayed, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you are the faintest version of yourself in the space that raised you. After the scholarship incident, the one they pretended not to see, I began noticing things I used to excuse. At first, they were so subtle I could have ignored them. That is the danger in subtlety. It convinces you are imagining it. For instance, whenever extended family visited, my parents filled the house with framed photos of Chase, his football trophies, his homecoming crown, his trip to Aspen. There were dozens of pictures of him smiling, centered, shining. In the entire house, do you know how many photos included me? 2. And in both, I was standing somewhere behind him, out of focus, like the background details of someone else's life. Whenever my mother introduced us at charity events, she had a script. "This is Chase, our pride," she would say. "And this is Riley. She is more of the academic type." The academic type. It sounded less like a compliment and more like a classification, a way to place me neatly into a drawer she never planned to open again. My father did the same thing, but in his own language. To him, numbers meant success, but only the right kind of numbers. Financial numbers, connections, projected outcomes. Every dinner conversation revolved around return on investment, mergers, or Chase's future in corporate consulting. When I tried to join in, sharing something about algorithms I was studying or a project I was building, he would nod politely but dismissively. "That is interesting," he would say, before turning immediately back to Chase. It was not that he disagreed with what I said, he simply never treated it as part of the world worth discussing. People forget that being invisible is not the same as being unwanted. You can want something and still refuse to see it. And in my family, they wanted the idea of me, not the reality. They wanted the daughter who would applaud Chase, not compete with him. The daughter who would stay small so their chosen child could stay extraordinary. By sophomore year of college, the erasing began to take shape in ways I could not ignore. Strange comments from professors. Emails I allegedly sent but never wrote. Missed scholarship notifications. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I overlooked something. Maybe I slipped up. Maybe I was not as organized as I thought. But when I traced back the timestamps and found that my university account had been accessed at times I was nowhere near a computer, it clicked. Someone was interfering, not to sabotage me catastrophically, just enough to ensure I never broke out of the box they built around me. When I confronted my family about the account breach, my mother laughed. Not a real laugh. That tight little social laugh she uses when she wants to dismiss a topic without appearing rude. She said, "Riley, sweetheart, you are overthinking again." Chase chimed in, claiming I needed to relax. My father suggested I focus more on my studies and less on imaginary issues. Imaginary issues. That was the phrase he used. Even when I had the evidence in front of me, that was the day I learned a very important truth. Being erased does not require malice, it only requires indifference. The cruelest version of abandonment is the one done slowly, under the guise of normalcy, until you begin to wonder if your own memories are exaggerated. From then on, I stopped asking for fairness. I stopped waiting for recognition. I began documenting everything: password changes, assignment uploads, scholarship applications, every achievement, every oversight, every strange pattern. Not because I planned to expose them, but because I needed to remind myself I was not imagining the cracks forming beneath my feet. And here is the part that stings most, the part that people never want to admit. Deep down, I still hoped they would notice me. Not the achievements, not the awards, not the metrics. Me, the girl who tried her best to be part of the family, the girl who waited for someone to see past the silence. But that hope faded the night my father said the words that would become the turning point in my life. "We measure success differently in this family, Riley. Sometimes people are valuable even if they do not produce much." He said it gently, as if it were wisdom. To me, it felt like a verdict. That was the moment I stopped trying to fit inside the frame they kept cropping me out of. And instead, I started building something of my own outside those walls. Somewhere they could not reach, somewhere I did not need permission to exist. And here is the hook you need to remember. The family that erases you never expects you to outgrow the version they created, especially when the child they dismissed quietly learns how to become unforgettable. Stay with me. You will see exactly how their erasing became the first step in my becoming. We've poured a lot of time and heart into creating this story. If you don't like it, give it a like anyway, and if you do enjoy it, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, let's get back to the story. If I had to pinpoint the moment I finally understood my place in the Morgan household, it wasn't the disownment letter or the scholarship they never acknowledged. It was the realization that no amount of proof would ever be enough for them. Not because my achievements lacked value, but because they were mine. And in my family, value only existed when it benefited someone else. After I discovered the strange interference in my university account, I expected something to change. Maybe not an apology, but at least a conversation. Some recognition that something was off. But instead, life at home continued with the same choreography it always had. My father came home late, talking loudly about investment forecasts. My mother curated her online persona with the precision of a jeweler cutting diamonds, and Chase floated through the house as if cameras were always pointed at him, even when they weren't. Meanwhile, I was drowning in contradictions. My professors praised my analytical mind. My classmates trusted me to lead group projects. I earned grant money, recognition, opportunities, but none of it translated at home. There, I was still the quiet sibling, the one who needed direction, the one who shouldn't obsess over details. I did. One night, during winter break, I overheard my parents talking about us in the living room. My father said sometimes kids have different ceilings, and Riley's is just lower than Chase's. My mother replied that maybe I'd marry someone successful and find my place that way. They said it gently, casually, as if they weren't discussing the limits of a daughter who was still awake upstairs, finishing a project she hoped would change the world. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor, staring at the carpet fibers as their words sank in. It wasn't anger I felt, it was confirmation, proof of what I had been sensing all along. The irony was that while they dismissed my work, the rest of the world was beginning to notice it. During my second year of college, I built a small routing algorithm for a class assignment. Just something simple, something functional. My professor told me I had the kind of mind that didn't just solve problems but redesigned them. That project grew, and slowly, piece by piece, so did I. But at home, I kept my head down, not out of fear but strategy. When you grow up unseen, you learn that silence can be a shield, and I used that silence to work, study, experiment, improve. Every time my father told me to focus on something more practical, every time my mother compared me to one of Chase's accomplishments, I tucked the words away like fuel. Their doubt didn't discourage me, it clarified where I stood. And clarity can be more powerful than support. The worst was when they pretended to encourage me. It sounded almost convincing. My mother once said she admired my discipline because it made me independent. My father said analytical minds were good as long as they didn't become obsessive. Chase told me I was unique, the same way someone compliments a decorative rock in a garden. Words that seemed kind until you looked closely and saw the shape of the cage behind them. It wasn't that they underestimated me, it was that they never expected me to outgrow the space they assigned me, and that misunderstanding would eventually become their biggest mistake. During a summer internship, I created a model that predicted delivery delays with surprising accuracy. My supervisor thought it should be developed into a full platform. I went home excited, pacing back and forth in the kitchen as I explained it to my family. My mother blinked twice before saying, "Well, that sounds nice, dear." My father asked if the project paid enough to justify the time. Chase didn't look up from his phone. In that moment, something snapped into perfect focus. Not anger, not disappointment, just truth. They didn't see me because they didn't want to, and if someone refuses to see you, no level of success can force their eyes open. That realization didn't break me, it freed me, because once you stop trying to be enough for the wrong people, you discover just how limitless you can be for yourself. I spent the next year building, designing, testing, learning. I filled notebooks with ideas, met quietly with classmates who believed in my work. I stopped looking for validation from a place that had never offered it, and gradually, I began to understand something else. Every system has a flaw, every structure has a weakness, and every family has a point where the truth becomes unavoidable. The Morgans thought their doubt would keep me small. Instead, it sharpened me. The girl they ignored was becoming the woman they would never be able to control, and the proof they dismissed would soon become the very thing that shattered the roles they built. If you have ever felt unseen by the people who were supposed to know you best, comment, "I hear you." Sometimes silence isn't weakness, sometimes silence is preparation, and the quiet child they overlooked was about to become unforgettable. By the time spring semester rolled around, I had stopped waiting for the Morgans to notice anything I did, not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. You cannot make someone see you when they are committed to looking past you. My work was growing, my ideas were evolving, and I was inching closer to something that felt like a future I had carved out myself. But even progress cannot fully prepare you for the moment your family decides to erase you on paper. 2 days before graduation, I was sitting in the campus library, reviewing data for a model I had been refining all week. My phone buzzed. A message from the family group chat. That alone was unusual. We rarely used it unless my mother wanted to coordinate outfits for holiday photos. When I opened the chat, all I saw was a reservation link. Maison Aurora, 8 o'clock, the same restaurant where my parents celebrated every milestone that belonged to Chase, and none of mine. Beneath the link, my mother had typed, "Pre-graduation dinner for Riley, dress appropriately." That was it. No congratulations, no warmth, not even a thumbs-up emoji. I clicked the reservation out of curiosity more than excitement. A small window popped up on the screen. The Morgan family. Guests: Gregory Morgan, Vanessa Morgan, Chase Morgan. My name was not on the list. For a moment, I froze. The imbalance was so familiar that I almost laughed. Of course they would plan a dinner for me without including me. It was the most honest metaphor for my entire childhood. A celebration of something I accomplished, but still not meant for me. Before I could process the sting, my phone buzzed again. A private message from Chase. "Don't overthink it, just a formatting thing." Formatting. That word landed with a clarity I had not expected, because that was exactly how they saw me, a variable, something that could be shifted in or out of place depending on the layout of their perfect lives. A formatting error. Nothing more. I stared at the reservation screen for a long minute, the names of my parents and brother glowing back at me, perfectly aligned, perfectly centered. And there I was, not missing, just unaccounted for. There is a difference. Missing implies someone noticed you were gone. Unaccounted for means they never considered you in the first place. Yet somehow, the moment did not break me. Instead, something inside me clicked into a strange kind of calm. The same calm I felt the night they handed me the disownment letter. The same calm I felt as a child standing behind Chase in all those photos. It was the calm that comes from recognizing a pattern that has repeated so many times, it no longer shocks you. Still, the omission carved a new line inside me. Not a wound, but a boundary. When I walked home that evening, Chicago felt colder than usual. Streetlights flickered against the pavement, blurring through the light rain drifting in soft diagonal streaks. I watched my reflection in the storefront windows as I passed. A woman moving quietly but deliberately. A woman who no longer needed permission to occupy space. When I reached my apartment, I set my bag down and opened my laptop. My inbox was filled with notifications I had not had the time to open yet. Emails from professors, invitations to present at small tech events, feedback from investors who had seen early demos of my project. All of it was noise around the one truth I now felt in my bones. I had been building a life my family didn't even know existed. While they were busy positioning Chase for the world they admired, I had been creating something that operated in a world they didn't understand. One built not on charm, or status, or appearances, but on logic, innovation, and systems that solved real problems. A world measured by impact, not impressions. The more I thought about the reservation, the clearer it became. My parents weren't excluding me accidentally, they were preserving a narrative. In their story, the Morgans were polished, unified, high-performing, and I existed somewhere adjacent, useful when they wanted to appear well-rounded, invisible when they wanted to shine. But what they didn't know was simple and soon to become irreversible. Their formatting error had already grown into a structural flaw, because while they spent years underestimating me, I had been quietly documenting everything. Every scholarship email they ignored, every project they dismissed, every milestone they forgot to pretend to care about, every small moment that would later become evidence of the truth they tried so hard to avoid. And that truth was coming for them. At that moment, I didn't know the full scale of what my project would become. I didn't know Titan Freet would soon step into my life, with an offer big enough to rewrite the path they assumed I would follow. I didn't know that this dinner, the one they forgot to include me in, would be the last time they controlled the narrative. All I knew was this: patterns repeat until someone breaks them, and I was finally ready to break mine. If you've ever felt like the person your family forgot to count, hit like on this video. Not for me, for you. Because your moment is coming too, and the people who underestimated you will never see it coming. Stay with me. The real shift is about to begin. The night I discovered my name was missing from the reservation, something in me shifted permanently. Not the kind of shift that comes with anger, or heartbreak, or even defiance. It was quieter than that, more precise, like a lock clicking into place after years of trying different keys. Because once you realize you cannot rely on recognition, you learn to rely on momentum. And I had more momentum than my family ever knew. What they never understood about me was simple. My silence was not emptiness, it was strategy. During the same years, they were polishing Chase into the perfect heir to the Morgan legacy. I had been quietly constructing something that did not need their legacy at all. Long before the dinner reservation, long before the disownment letter, I had been building a system, a vision, a future. One that started as a class assignment and slowly evolved into something real enough to stand on its own. It began with a late night in the university lab. The building was mostly empty, lights dimmed, the hum of old hardware echoing through the quiet hallways. I was supposed to be analyzing transportation delay variables for my coursework, but I saw something different hidden in the data. A pattern, faint but consistent, a map of inefficiencies that seemed almost too obvious once I noticed them. I spent the next week writing an algorithm to predict disruptions before they occurred. Just a simple model, nothing extraordinary. But when I ran the simulation at 3:30 in the morning, watching the lines of code shift and realign, something clicked. It worked. Not perfectly, but impressively enough that for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something bigger than myself. My professor, Dr. Patel, saw my potential before I fully did. She was the only person in my entire academic life who did not treat my ideas as accidents or hobbies. When she looked at my data, her eyes sharpened. "You know what this could become, right?" she asked. I shook my head. She smiled. A system, a platform, something companies could actually use. Her belief in me wasn't loud or emotional, it was factual, and sometimes facts mean more than affection. That was the moment VectorPath was born. Of course, I didn't build it alone. One thing about creating something worth noticing is that the right people tend to find their way in. Lena, a design major with a mind for user experience, joined first. She had a calm presence, the kind that grounded a team. Marcus joined next, a statistics genius who saw numbers the way artists see color. Together, the three of us met in quiet corners of the library, empty classrooms after hours, and a tiny rented workspace above a closed sandwich shop. The place smelled faintly of pickles and cardboard, but it was ours. We worked through nights, skipping meals, scribbling equations on whiteboards, until the markers dried out. We argued, tested theories, rewrote code, celebrated breakthroughs with cheap vending machine snacks. It was chaotic, beautiful, alive in every way my childhood home never was. And the more we built, the more I realized something important. My family did not know me well enough to understand what I was capable of. They never saw my late nights, my revisions, my failures, my breakthroughs. They never saw the version of me that fought for something, They only saw the version of me that stayed quiet at the dinner table. That ignorance was their blind spot, and my advantage. By the time VectorPath had its first working model, companies on campus were already noticing us. Startups asked for demos, advisors wanted meetings, investors followed up with emails filled with words like potential and scalability, words I had never heard in my own home. And I kept all of it to myself. Not because I was hiding, but because some things grow better in the dark. Not everything deserves an audience while it is becoming. During those months, I learned more about loyalty, grit, and purpose than I had in 20 years of being a Morgan. Lena and Marcus never cared that I wasn't flashy, or strategic, or socially polished. They cared that the work mattered. They cared that I showed up, that I pushed, that I listened. And for the first time in my life, I felt chosen. Not because of image, not because of status or expectation, but because of contribution. I knew my family would never understand this kind of world. To them, value lived in public spaces, in applause, in achievements that could be photographed and posted, but the foundation of VectorPath was built on quiet, relentless work. The kind that does not shimmer, the kind that builds empires slowly, from the inside out. The night before our first demo for potential partners, I got another text from my mother, a picture of Chase speaking at a small corporate event. "Look at your brother leading already," she typed, so proud. I stared at the photo for a moment, then closed the message without replying. Not out of resentment, out of clarity, because I knew something they didn't, something they were about to discover in the most unexpected way. While they were celebrating Chase for stepping onto a stage, I was building the blueprint for something far more powerful than applause, something worth millions, something they did not even know had their last name attached to it. And here is the hook, the part people love to debate. Do you think families like mine create their own downfall by choosing the wrong child to invest in? Or do they simply underestimate the quiet one until it's too late? Comment your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious which side you fall on, because my story is about to prove one of those sides right. When you spend your life being underestimated, you learn to move quietly. But quiet does not mean small. Quiet does not mean incapable. Quiet is simply the sound of someone preparing. And by the time VectorPath began to take shape, I had been preparing for years without even realizing it. Every dismissal, every ignored achievement, every moment I stood slightly out of frame, it all became fuel. The kind that burns slow, steady, and brilliantly at the exact moment it is needed. Our first official demo was scheduled for a Friday morning in early April. The three of us, me, Lena, and Marcus, arrived at the University Innovation Hall, carrying laptops, cables, and the kind of tired excitement that only comes from building something with your bare hands. The room smelled faintly of new paint and old carpet. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long geometric shadows across the floor. We were expecting a panel of professors, maybe a local business owner or two. Nothing overwhelming, nothing intimidating. So when I walked in and saw him sitting in the second row, I felt my heart stutter. Owen Blake. Not a local entrepreneur, not a curious professor. Owen Blake, Chief Operating Officer of Titan Freight Solutions, one of the most influential logistics companies in the country. A man known for solving impossible problems. A man who did not waste time on projects that weren't worth it. I stared for a second too long. He noticed. He nodded once, in that quiet way powerful people do when they've come to evaluate something that might actually matter. The demo began. Marcus walked through the data framework. Lena explained the interface. Then it was my turn. I breathed slowly, grounding myself in the rhythm that had carried me through countless nights in the lab. I explained how VectorPath predicted transportation disruptions before they occurred, how it rerouted shipments with remarkable accuracy, how it cut costs using a simulation engine we built from scratch. As I spoke, something unexpected happened. Owen Blake leaned forward. He wasn't politely listening. He was studying, calculating, tracking the possibilities hidden in every sentence. It was the first time in my life that someone with power looked at me, not with doubt, not with dismissal, but with respect. When the presentation ended, the applause began softly and grew louder. My cheeks warmed, but not from embarrassment, from recognition, the kind I had never received at home. Afterward, Owen approached our table. "You built something scalable," he said, his voice steady, measured. "Something companies like ours have been trying to perfect for years. You did this with 3 people and university resources? I nodded, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. He smiled faintly. Remarkable. He asked to see the raw data, the error margins, the rerouting engine. He asked thoughtful questions, the kind that meant he wasn't just interested, he was impressed. Before leaving, he slipped a card into my hand. Let's talk, Riley. Titan Freight is expanding its predictive operations, and you may have just solved a problem we couldn't. That card stayed in my palm long after he walked out of the room. Smooth, heavy, real. I held it the way someone holds a truth they aren't sure they're ready to believe. But I was ready. I just didn't know it yet. 3 meetings followed. The first was purely technical. He wanted proof, and I had it. The second was strategic. He wanted scale, and I showed him how VectorPath could grow. The third was personal. He wanted to understand me. He asked about my goals, about my vision, about what I wanted this project to become. Not once did he mention whether my family supported me. Not once did he compare me to anyone else. For the first time in my life, I was evaluated on merit alone. By the end of the 3rd meeting, he slid a folder across the table, the same way my mother once slid the disownment letter toward me. But this folder held something very different. Inside was an acquisition offer for $7.8 million. $7.8 million. I remember the way the sunlight caught the edges of the paper, the way my breath stilled, the way I felt both weightless and anchored at the same time. We want you as Director of Predictive Systems, he said. You built the core. You should lead its future. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I hesitated, but because I had spent so long being underestimated that I needed one moment to absorb what it felt like to be seen. When I finally looked up, he said something I will never forget. You don't have to prove yourself to me, Riley. You already did. Those words were everything my parents never offered. I signed the contract 2 days later. The money transferred, my future opened, and my family still had no idea. Walking out of Titan Freight headquarters that evening, the city felt different. Bigger, brighter, like it finally had room for me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in the shadow of the Morgan expectations. I was living entirely outside of them. But as freeing as that was, another realization settled into place. My family had spent years shaping a story about me. The quiet one, the supporting role, the afterthought. But with one signature, I had rewritten that story. And soon, they would see exactly how wrong they had been. Here is what I still wonder, and what I want you to think about too. Do you believe success should be shared with a family that never believed in you? Or is silence the only repayment they deserve? Tell me what you think, because the next part of this story answers that question in a way none of them could have predicted. Thank you for staying with us this far. If you're busy or need to step away right now, hit like so you can easily find this video again later. Now, let's get back to the story. The day I signed the Titan Freight contract, the world felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer, like someone had finally wiped the fog from a window I'd been pressing my face against for years. For the first time in my life, I understood something simple but life-changing. I was no longer trying to survive my family's story. I was writing my own. Yet, even with the ink still drying on that multi-million-dollar agreement, I knew I couldn't ignore what was waiting for me back home. The reservation, the dinner, the performance the Morgans had been polishing my entire life. And I would have to walk into that room knowing they had already prepared an ending for me. The irony was almost beautiful. They believed they were about to cut me out of their world, not knowing I had already built one that made theirs irrelevant. But this wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about closure, about reclaiming something they had taken long before they ever handed me a disownment letter. Myself. The night the realization settled in, I returned to my apartment and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. The lights were off, the city humming beyond my windows in soft metallic rhythms. My laptop waited on the coffee table, screen still lit from the transfer confirmation. $7.8 million, a number so still and perfect, it almost looked fictional. But it wasn't fiction. It was proof. And proof has weight. I pulled the Titan Freight folder from my bag and placed it beside a small stack I had been quietly building over the years. Every scholarship I had earned, every research award, every letter of recommendation, every grant, every line of code that had shaped VectorPath. I had kept it all, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You document the things people refuse to see so that one day, when it matters, you can place the truth right in front of them. As I sorted the documents, aligning the edges until everything was perfectly straight, I started to understand how different this dinner would be. They believed they were holding the final card, but they had miscalculated something crucial. I wasn't the same girl they spent years sidelining. That girl had hoped for approval. This one had outgrown it. I could already imagine how the dinner would unfold. My mother's polished smile, her hand lifting gently, as if she were bestowing something grand. My father's controlled posture, the tone he used when making decisions he believed were wise. Chase, adjusting the angle of his phone, because he loved capturing moments he didn't understand. They would come prepared with a script. They always did. But this time, I had the real story. And it lived in the documents now laid out across my coffee table. The next morning, I woke with an unfamiliar feeling in my chest. Not excitement, not fear, certainty, the kind I'd never experienced growing up in that house. I spent the day organizing, printing backups, scanning files, placing everything into a clean gray folder with a metal clasp. I treated each page with precision, the way a surgeon handles instruments before an operation. Every document was a scalpel, a truth waiting to cut through years of curated illusion. While my printer hummed, my phone buzzed. Another message from my mother. Reminder: dinner is at 8. Wear something elegant. Elegant. As if I were being polished for a photo, as if my purpose was still to fit the frame they built. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because silence felt more accurate. Silence was the language they had taught me. Now it belonged to me. By late afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a simple charcoal blazer over a soft white top. Nothing extravagant, nothing performative, just clean lines, deliberate choices, and the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove what had already been documented. When I was little, my mother used to say presentation is everything. Back then it meant clothing, posture, polish. Now it meant truth. Real presentation isn't about what you wear, it's about what you carry. And I was carrying an entire new life. I slipped the folder into my bag and paused, letting the weight settle across my shoulder. It felt right, balanced, final. On the train ride to the restaurant, the city lights flickered across the windows, blinking in patterns that reminded me of the simulations I used to run late at night. Predictable, yet full of possibility. People around me talked, scrolled, laughed, existed inside their own stories. None of them knew that mine was about to split open in the most defining way. By the time I reached the block, Maison Aurora glowed like a polished gem set against the evening skyline. The same chandeliers, the same marble floors, the same space where they celebrated Chase's promotions, awards, and corporate accomplishments. Now it was my turn. But not in the way they expected. As I stood outside the glass doors, watching my reflection blend with the warm lights inside, I realized something that made everything click into place. My family wasn't the obstacle, they were the catalyst. Every dismissal, every oversight, every quiet reminder that I was not their chosen child, it had pushed me further than their approval ever could. If they had believed in me, maybe I never would have learned how to believe in myself. And that truth, quiet, sharp, powerful, was exactly what I planned to bring into that room. But before I walked through those doors, one last question settled in my mind. The kind of question that defines every turning point. Would they recognize the woman walking toward them? Or would they still be looking for the girl they tried so hard to overlook? Stay with me. Because the moment I stepped inside, I learned the answer, in a way none of us could ever come back from. Stepping into Maison Aurora that night felt like walking onto a stage I never auditioned for. The golden chandeliers spilled warm light across the polished floors. Violins hummed in the background, and the air carried that familiar scent of truffle butter my mother pretended she could taste even when she couldn't. Everything was staged, curated, controlled. A perfect theater for the Morgans' final performance. Only this time, I wasn't playing the role they had written for me. I spotted them immediately, my mother adjusting her bracelet as if preparing for a photo shoot, my father sitting perfectly straight, and Chase, holding his phone up, recording subtle clips, like he was directing a documentary no one asked for. They looked rehearsed. And maybe they were. I wouldn't have put it past them. I walked toward the table, feeling something I had never felt in their presence before. Steadiness. A quiet steadiness. the kind that anchors you when everything else tries to shake you loose. "Riley," my mother said, smiling with too many teeth, "we have something for you." Her voice had that bright, polished quality she used when she wanted to sound loving in front of an audience. A server approached the table at the same moment, gently placing an envelope in front of my plate. White, heavy paper, clean edges, almost ceremonial. This was it, the scene they had practiced in their heads. My father cleared his throat. "It's time we move forward," he said, tone flat and authoritative, like he was announcing a corporate restructuring instead of dismantling his own family. My mother nodded gracefully. "This is from all of us." Chase lowered his phone just enough to capture my reaction more clearly. A true professional. I opened the envelope deliberately, letting the silence stretch across the table. Inside was a document stamped with formal language, so formal it almost felt theatrical. A statement declaring I was no longer part of the Morgan family, signed at the bottom by each of them. Their signatures looked flawless, smooth, practiced. They probably used their best pens. I studied the paper for a moment, then looked up. 3 faces stared back at me, expectant, rigid, bracing for impact. They wanted tears, rage, shock, something dramatic enough for Chase to upload to whatever folder he kept labeled Family Moments. Instead, I said it simply, "Thank you." The words landed like a dropped glass. My mother blinked. My father shifted in his seat. Chase's phone dipped inches lower. "You're thanking us?" my mother asked. I nodded once. "For the closure." The air tightened, and for the first time in my life, I watched their confidence flicker, because closure only benefits the person walking away. I reached into my bag, the calm in my chest growing heavier, more grounded. Then I placed a gray folder on the table, the same color Owen Blake had used when handing me the Titan freight contract. It looked out of place against the Morgan aesthetic, too practical, too real. "I have something for you too," I said. My father frowned, wary. My mother leaned forward, curiosity overtaking poise. Chase forgot to hold his phone at a flattering angle. I opened the folder toward them. The acquisition documents shimmered under the chandelier light. Titan Freight Solutions, official signatures, my title, the $7.8 million confirmation. For a long, suspended moment, no one breathed. My mother's smile vanished first. It crumpled inward, as if someone had switched off her core power source. My father squinted, reading each line twice, his jaw tightening. Chase whispered something under his breath, probably realizing he had been filming the wrong sibling this entire time. My voice remained steady, almost gentle. "I sold the system I built. The deal closed last week, and I'll be leading the predictive systems division after graduation." My father's wine glass clicked against the table, his hand unsteady. "You sold a company?" "I built one," I corrected quietly. "Then sold it." Wise. The sentence was simple, but the truth inside it was sharp enough to gut the entire table. My mother looked from the contract to me, confusion and disbelief unraveling her expression. "Why didn't you tell us?" I almost laughed. "You never asked." Silence rippled across the room, not the kind they used to force me into. A new kind, the kind born of shock so complete it steals language. I picked up their disownment letter with 2 fingers, slid it gently across the table toward my father. "You can keep this," I said. "I already have my own version." I watched the realization hit them slow, devastating, irreversible. Everything they thought they controlled was gone. Everything they thought they knew had already changed before they even arrived tonight. They had tried to remove me from the family, not knowing I had already removed the family from my future. As I stood to leave, I caught Chase's reflection in the restaurant window phone still in hand, completely unsure whether to film or hide. I didn't look back when I walked away. I didn't need to. Their silence followed me out the door like a shadow. The city air hit my face cool, sharp, free. My bag felt lighter, my chest felt wider. For the first time, I understood what it meant to carry only yourself. And here's the part I'm curious about, the part people love debating. If you were in my place, would you have handed them the contract, or would you have let them find out on the evening news? Comment below. Bonus points if you roast Chase's filming skills, because trust me, even his camera was confused that night. The night I walked out of Maison Aurora, the city air felt different against my skin. Not colder, not warmer, just honest. The kind of honesty you can only feel once you've stepped out of a room, where everything, every smile, every word, every gesture was rehearsed. Behind me, the restaurant door eased shut with a soft click, sealing the Morgans inside their gilded world of expectations, control, and perfectly staged illusions. For the first time in my life, I wasn't on the wrong side of that door. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me. Nearby, cars passed in steady pulses. The street lamps drew long silver lines across the sidewalk. My breath came out slow, even, grounded, the calm that follows a storm you didn't create but finally chose to walk away from. In my hand, I still held the folder. Their letter tucked neatly inside, the edges crisp under my fingertips. It felt lighter than it had at the table. Maybe because now, it wasn't a wound, it was evidence, a timestamp, proof of the exact moment the story they wrote for me ended, and the one I wrote for myself began. I didn't rush home. I let my steps find their own pace. The weight that had followed me for years, expectation, invisibility, comparison, was finally slipping away with every block I passed. You don't realize how heavy something is until you stop carrying it. When I reached my apartment, the sky had shifted into that blue-gray quiet that comes just before dawn. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and the silence greeted me like an old friend, not empty, not lonely, but mine. I set the folder on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water. The reflection in the window caught my eye, a woman standing tall, steady, unshaken. A woman I had grown into quietly while the world insisted she was small. I pulled out the disownment letter first. Read it again, not to feel hurt but to feel distance. Their signatures no longer felt sharp. They felt irrelevant, like an outdated version of a software I had already replaced. Then I pulled out the Titan freight documents. The weight of the paper was solid, grounding. 2 worlds, side by side, one chosen for me, one chosen by me. I picked up the letter and slid it behind the frame of my degree, on the wall, not hidden, not displayed, just placed, filed under what was. My degree, my work, my future, filed under what is. People talk a lot about forgiveness, about closure. But closure isn't something someone gives you. Closure is the moment you recognize you don't need their permission to move forward. That night, I didn't forgive my family. Forgiveness requires remorse. What I gained was something else, perspective. I finally saw them clearly, not as villains, not as victims, but as people trapped in an image of success so narrow they couldn't fit their own daughter inside it. And I realized something important. I didn't need their approval. I only needed my own. When I sat down on the couch, the city was waking outside. Soft sounds drifted through the open window, distant buses, early joggers, someone laughing down the street. Life continued. And so did I. My phone buzzed again. A message from Chase. "We didn't mean it like that. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a few seconds before turning the phone face down. Some conversations aren't meant to be reopened. Some doors stay closed because the room behind them is still toxic. Not every story needs a reconciliation arc. Some need an ending. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. In my chest, there wasn't heartbreak, there wasn't guilt, just space. Space I had never been allowed to take up before. The girl who once begged to be seen had become the woman who no longer needed witnesses. That was the quiet victory my family never saw coming. As the sunlight stretched across my living room, catching on the silver edges of the Titan freight contract, a realization settled in. Revenge doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it feels like standing alone in your apartment at sunrise, knowing your life finally belongs to you. I picked up the folder one last time before putting it away. The future felt wide, open, unbounded, built on data, grit, late nights, and the belief in myself they never cared to have. And here's the truth I want you to remember. Families break loudly, but healing happens in the quiet moments you choose for yourself. If you've ever walked away from a story that tried to shrink you, you already understand the ending. And if you've ever become someone your family never believed you could be, well, then you know this isn't the end at all. It's the beginning. Before you go, here's what I want to ask. Do you think Riley should ever speak to her family again, or let that silence stay permanent? Comment below, your answer might surprise you. And if you want to hear what happens next in her life, make sure to subscribe.